Well, I am back, and as you can probably hear in my voice, I'm a little bit under the weather, and I have been for a few days. But today I want to go over just a couple things that we're nearing the end of the season. Yes, I know it's a terrible time for everyone, but it's inevitable. So let's go over a couple of things, couple of common questions, I guess, that I've been getting recently about some of the end of the season stuff. Everything really looks amazing. Of course, it's ideal temperatures, but we're getting into the 40s next week for highs and in the 20s for lows. So that's really going to probably shut things down for the most part. And we'll talk about that as well. But one of the questions that a lot of people have at the end of the season is, what do I do with all of my stuff that's in here? Do I leave some of it in here? Do I take some of it somewhere else? And right now I'm gonna start to think about the pilgrimage of all of my liquids to our basement. And this is the time of year that my wife absolutely loves, because I get to take everything liquid out of here, which is a lot of stuff, and try to find a space down in our basement, which we already don't have enough space. So that's what I have to do with all of my liquids, just because the shed is not heated, it's not insulated, and of course, you know, it gets plenty cold here to freeze things. Some other stuff, really, grass seed, usually that's okay, but it would be nice if you could put it in a container so that in case anything gets in your shed, like mice or something else, that you don't have an issue with that getting eaten, because I've definitely had mice eat a lot of grass seed before. So I have most of that stuff in totes, and if I have space I'll bring it downstairs, but otherwise if it's sealed in here for the winter, I usually leave it there. Everything else equipment wise we will talk about, but I wanted to get that out there first. Another common question at the end of the season is, when should you stop mowing? And really that's going to come down to temperatures more than it's going to come down to a date or anything like that. So as I personally get into those 40s for temperatures coming here in early November, usually upper 40s and 20s for lows at night is when things are really going to slow down. And so you're going to see this pretty naturally. You're going to notice that things just aren't growing like they were during the warmer parts of the year, and that's totally completely normal, and that's exactly what happens at the end of our season. Really the only thing after that would be, for me, I don't have any of my leaves down yet, and I only have a couple trees in my backyard, but I do have a neighbor that has a big willow tree, and usually that comes into my yard at some point. So I will be doing some more mowings towards the end of the season, like Thanksgiving time, somewhere around there here for our climate in central Iowa, but that's really not mowing to take off anything of the grass, it's just to clean up the leaves. Speaking of those leaves as well, what should you do with the leaves? Do you need to pick them up? Do you not? I've made videos on this in the past, so if you want to see a whole video that has more of this topic, you can definitely check those out from last season. But the short answer is, if you can mulch up leaves, mulch them up. So for me, since I only have a minimal amount of trees, and even when my neighbor's stuff comes into my yard, I just go ahead and come out a couple times and mulch those up, or keep up with them to where I don't have huge piles of leaves. So if you do have huge piles of leaves and they're like 6 inches thick, then it's probably going to be kind of difficult to mulch that. But otherwise, if you can keep up with it every few days and start chopping them up, it's going to be good to bring that back into the soil and just leave them in place. So how about equipment? Well, at the end of my season, I usually change the oil in my mowers, and I get them kind of cleaned up, clean the decks out, make sure everything is going to be tip-top, ready for the next spring. Now, some people don't do this. Some people wait until the spring to get everything cleaned up. It honestly doesn't matter really in that sense, but since I get fresh oil put in there, I don't have to worry about it in the spring, and I'm just ready to go. The other thing is the great debate between, do you run a mower out of gas and let it sit all winter, or do you leave it full, put some fuel stabilizer in? Here where I'm at, I still have the luxury of finding non-ethanol gas, and so I use that in everything that I have. I don't ever put ethanol into any of my small engine stuff. Some of you don't have that luxury, so some of you are just using a fuel stabilizer or something along those lines, and I think that's totally fine. You can check your manual on your specific machine if you want to kind of know what they recommend. For me, I usually run some fuel stabilizer through the system a little bit, even though I have non-ethanol gas, and then I will just fill mine up and let it sit like that. And I've been doing that now since like 2013 or something, and I've never had any issues with that sort of system. But again, check your manuals on your specific machines if you want to know what they recommend. I think the best bet is just get some fuel stabilizer in there for sure, and then you can decide whether you want to run it out or keep it full, and you'll be ready to go in the spring. So how tall should you leave your lawn before it goes into the winter time? Now, this again I think is something that's debatable. I've tried different methods. I've been at 3 inches before. I've been all the way down to 2 inches on bluegrass, and of course out front I'm at 3/4 of an inch down to a 1/2 inch on some of that turf. I think the main thing is you just don't want it to be super shaggy. So if you keep your lawn at 4 inches or something that tall, as that snow comes down and packs onto there, it's gonna just kind of sit and smother everything, and the grass is going to kind of be smothered on top of itself. But anywhere somewhere around maybe a notch or two lower than where you're at currently for most of the season has always been fine for me. So right now I'm at 3 inches on my fescue, and I don't really anticipate going much lower than that. So maybe, like I said, a notch or two, which is like a 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 an inch lower as we get to the end of the season. But no reason to go out there and chop it down or scalp it down or anything like that and think that it needs to be super short. In my own experience, I've never seen that it makes a huge difference wherever you're at. You just don't want it to be like 4 or 5 inches tall. Fertilizer, when should your last application be, or should be doing any more? And I've just probably put down my last application on the front yard since I'm doing spoon feeding up there. I did some simple lawn solutions about a week ago, and then now I put down my last application of Equalizer for the year. So I approached that turf just a little bit differently than maybe you guys would in terms of your high cut turf. So let's talk about that. I've only put down about 2 pounds of nitrogen total this year on my tall fescue, and since it's been looking fantastic, I don't think it needs any more than that. That's a pretty minimal amount of fertilizer, but it looks good, and so I'm gonna pretty much leave it where it's at right now. I've made a couple videos as well in the last few years about winterizing, some of the more traditional ways, and then some of the new research that's been done on that. So that's kind of a discussion for itself more than the scope of this video. So I will go ahead and link that right here to last year's video on winterizing. But really what it comes down to is my last application of fertilizer, typically when I had Kentucky bluegrass, would be when I was around those 40s for highs, upper 40s, when the grass was just starting to stop. It's when I would put down my last application of fertilizer, water that in at that point, and let it still be used before we get into next season. Some people's thinking is that you're gonna load a bunch of fertilizer onto the ground and just let it sit there for winter, and then in the spring it will be used. But a lot of times I don't really like that method, because I feel like what's going to inevitably happen during the winter is some of that is going to be moved away from the location where you want it to be. It's not going to be used, and in terms of pollution and things like that, again, there's a little more discussion on that in the winterizing video. But for me, I just get down my last application around the upper 40s for if you've been doing a typical granular program on your yard. Get that watered in, and that will be the method that I have been using the last few years and worked really well. So those were just some of the common questions that I've seen recently in some comments, but please leave a comment down below if you have another question. I wanted to get this out before it gets too cold and before it gets too far into the end of the season, so you have this info and you're ready to go for the end of the year. I'm gonna get ready for some mowing here for the Halloween time frame, and probably get an application of the lawn energizer down about today. It's Tuesday. 3 to 5 days before Halloween is usually when I get that down, so I'm gonna do that later today. Late week, I will give you sort of what my lawn looked like at the Halloween time frame, the last hurrah for us cool season folks here for the most part. So again, leave a comment below if you have a question. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.